It is early May 2026, and the Kesrael fanning crew is sitting in a small park alongside the quietly flowing north branch of the southwest Miramichi River in Juniper, New Brunswick. The river is still running a bit high from spring runoff as it flows under CN's Nappadogna South. This is a nice spot to sit and ponder railroading while waiting for trains to come. And it was here on this morning that we started laying out how to capture and present the journey that I, before me and myself joined the crew, took on September 1991, back home for me to New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. If you're to rewatch my Welcome to the Channel video that will pop up on my YouTube channel homepage, you would know that I grew up as a kid in Moncton, New Brunswick, the hub city, before heading back to Ontario in 1979. This was my first big solo trip, no family or others, that I would ever have taken. Armed with binders of topographical maps, employee timetables from CN and CP, and magazine articles, and my ever-present scanner, off I went. Remember, folks, no internet, cell phones, or social media like we have today back then. It was hope, luck, and watching the signals. While the bulk of the photos will be rail-related, I did stop at a few places of interest from my youth. Most of the photos were from Kodachrome 64 slides with a roll or two of Ektachrome, shot on my two Nikon cameras, an N2000 and my Jewel, an F3. I did shoot several rolls of Fuji print film as well. My note-taking back then left lots to be desired, but I am comfortable knowing exactly where all of the shots were taken, except for maybe a couple. So all these shots are mine except for at least one, and those will be duly noted. As I was going through scanning the slides and photo negatives, I came across things that I had forgotten about and that are now mostly gone. A few items have been posted on Facebook several years ago, but they were known to me. I hope everyone enjoys this journey that I took and gets a chance to armchair rail fan back in time. The journey I embarked on actually started at the end of August, when I left Ontario to head east. Things got started on August 31st at CN Pelletier. We're headed eastward to Riviere, Bleue, and on to Edmundston. From there, it was downriver to St. Leonard and Grand Falls before following the old CP lines down along the St. John River Valley through Aroostook, Perth, Bath, Bristol, through Florenceville and Hartland to King's Landing for a night. A small backtrack to Florenceville, and then off east I went, heading for Moncton. From Moncton it was off to Truro and a few places around there, with a quick trip down to Halifax. Back in Truro, I started back west to Amherst, and then on to Cape Tormentine, and stayed in Moncton for the night. After that, it was on to the funny National Park here for a couple of days before making my way to Sussex, and then down to St. John for several days checking out CN Island Yard and the CP Yard out along Devers Road, which is now NBSR. And also checked on a few other items. After watching a CP eastbound travel part of the Macadam Sub, it was off to St. Stephen. Things were getting long by this point, and the weather forecast was not looking great starting in a couple of days. I slipped over to St. Andrews and then headed for Macadam, with a slight side trip. Once in Macadam and checking things out there, I crossed over the border into the state of Maine, at Vanceboro, and headed for Millinocket and Brownville Junction. I was not well versed in the geography of Maine and made life easy for myself and just headed straight out west and then up to Jackman. Things were very quiet there, and I called enough was enough and headed north to Quebec City, turned west, and headed back home. While I did stop a few times on the way, it was still a 21-hour run in my truck from when I left St. Stephen and got home west of Toronto. With the stage set now, please enjoy A Personal Journey Back in Time, September 1991. August 31st, 1991. I am standing looking more or less compass east at mile 68 Pelletier Sub at, well, CN Pelletier. If you were to stand here today by this switch to what is now a backtrack, this scene would look pretty much the same, except the building on the very far right is no longer there. A westbound train made up of container wells and flat cars soon came by with CN 5357 and SD40-2W, leading SD40, 5048, and 20 2043. 2043 was the last unit in a group of 44 MLW C630M units that CN bought in the late 60s. This train will be heading downgrade to the Montmagny sub on what is known as the Pelletier cutoff. The former CN Monk sub to Joff Yard cuts off to the left by the switch in the near distance. I should note that as I journey along, I will show maps only as I think is necessary. More information on places like Pelletier can be found in my early videos of trains in and around Pelletier. Just use the search icon on the home page for the channel to discover more. From here I continued east and found this maintenance away shack. Not sure exactly where, some say Riviere Bleue or Ascou, but I do know where this one is. We're in Riviere Bleue, Quebec, where another westbound with double stacks, this time being led by a pair of GE-8 40CMs, CN 2410 and 2415. These units are only about a year and a half old at this time. This photo for me was one of the hidden gems and forgotten memories that I took on this trip. If you were in Riviere Bleue today, this is roughly where the building was sitting. Likely just past this little crossing at mile 45.3 Pelletier sub. The sweet thing about this is that it still exists. Just a short ways away, it is now part of an historic display, and the building has a bit of a story to it. It was built as a portable station and may have been used as a station for Aubut, where a sawmill was located. Aubut is just west of Riviere Bleue at the west end of Lac Long and would have been just a short ways east of the east switch for the current CN turret siding. This building is open for display from mid-June to mid-October, I believe. And just across the road is the former CN Riviere Bleue station. The station in 1991 had already transitioned to a community site and an art gallery, as it still is in 2026. Edmundston, New Brunswick for the night, and with an early start on September the 1st, I could see several Bangor and Aroostook Jeep 38s across the St. John River in Madawaska, Maine. Bar unit number 92 would have been part of the power for trains 211 and 212. Shortly afterwards, a westbound CN intermodal was seen pulling down number 2 Maine in CN's Edmundston yard for a crew change, behind another pair of -8 40CMs, this time 2423 and 2429. We were able to catch them after departing Edmundston at Rue Laundry in St. Hilaire, mile 5.78 Pelletier sub a short while later. From here I headed back east, following the St. John River to St. Leonard, New Brunswick, and found this westbound near the east siding switch at St. Leonard, with maintenance away camp cars, a transfer van, a rail crane and its boom car, tucked away in the siding. Power on this possible intermodal train was CN 5295, an SD 40-2W, 2104, a Bombardier HR 616, and 9588, a Jeep 40-2LW. Hard to tell, but back then there was a small team track on the north side of the main line, and there was some track equipment in it that day. Working my way further east towards Grand Falls, we encountered a pair of Jeep 40-2LWs, 9528 and 9443, leading another westbound train near mile 188.5 Napadog South. The main line here runs between the St. John River and what is now NB 44. Back then, though, NB 44 was the Trans-Canada Highway. Further east, we found ourselves watching an intermodal train pass under the Levy Road Bridge at what was the west end of CN's Bluebell siding. Another pair of -840 CMs are leading it. 2413 can be seen as the trailing unit. This spot was always memorable for me, but not because of the train. Silly me, I locked myself out of my truck and had to borrow a long skinny stick from a kind resident to be able to hit the electric lock button through a barely open window. And thankfully I was able to get my truck unlocked and was still able to catch CN 308, a Toronto to Halifax manifest, crossing CN's Little Salmon River Bridge that is in between Drummond and New Denmark, New Brunswick. Nothing little about this roughly 3,920 foot long bridge. CN 2419 is leading another Dash 8 40 cm with a 43 car train. These GE units like to smoke a bit at times, just like the old MLW units. Back in Grand Falls, I found CN's Grand Falls Station, still standing. Sadly, all that is there now is an empty space and the Grand Falls Station name sign. That would be all that I saw on September the 1st, and I started the second early in St. Leonard, staring at the red signal 1943. This signal is on the west side of Rue de Pont, and the old CN St. Leonard station was right in this area, somewhere to the right. The plan now for the day was to follow CP's Edmundston Sub, south to Aroostook. The CP's Grand Falls Station is across the St. John River from CN's, along Rue Portage at West Chapel Road. At this time, CP Edmundston and Shogomoc subs were in various stages of being abandoned. Operations had been placed under the Canadian Atlantic Railway umbrella, and operations here appear to have more or less stopped to a point somewhere south of Perth Junction. I will not get into it here, but the loss of several bridges that cross the St. John River further south hastened these abandonments. The station was still standing on July the 8th, 2026, but barely. Numerous holes in the roof and a good downhill lean. Back on the road, the day was still a bit foggy as I drove south following CP's Edmundston Sub, but still gorgeous views across the valley, along with this whistle post peeking above the tasseled corn tops. Aroostook, New Brunswick was the terminal point for the Edmundston and Shogomoc subs, and a former line to Aroostook, Maine, and was somewhat of a major center of operations in the region. Trains destined to the sawmill and Plaster Rock on the Tobic sub would originate from here as well. It was home to a station and a freight house, as well as a roundhouse with turntable. The station was a bit more to the north, closer to the south end of Jewett Drive, and from Google Maps, remnants may still remain buried in the trees. The freight shed was just across Jewett Drive, and quite a classic structure. As we look north, the line will curve to the right and cross the Aroostook River. Somewhere just before that curve, and still inside the yard limits, there was a switch for a line used to go left to Aroostook, Maine. Also, a bit further up the yard was a small scale house and scale track. As we look south down what was once a decent-sized yard, we can see a couple of cars are still there. One is a CP van, number 437485, which is looking rough and, well, abandoned. Also, there's an old Canadian Pacific 40-foot boxcar that looks like it might have been a company or stores car. No idea whatever would have happened to these two cars. Just a bit past the boxcar, on the river side of the yard, was this two-stall roundhouse. It looks like it has been stripped of anything valuable on the insides. I can just imagine what it would have looked like with an engine sitting inside. A sad end to a lot of history. The turntable, which looks like it could still be used, is quickly being reclaimed by Mother Nature. Leaving here and heading a bit further south, following the Shogomoc Sub to Perth Andover, and then crossing the St. John River to Perth Junction. Perth Junction was where the Tobique and Shogomoc Subs met. Looking south, the station was close to the intersection of Station and Post Office Streets. The station is long gone, and I believe the house is now gone as well. No more feed store here either. The lower windows on the stations are boarded up, showing signs that things have ended quickly here. Just a bit past the station was a small yard, and as we turned, looking north, the Tobique Sub was straight ahead, and the Shogomoc would take a left turn at a switch to head to the bridge over the St. John River. I always clearly remember this scene, as I always figured it was a scene that screams old-time railroading, and could have been a scene anywhere in Canada or the U.S. with a house's front porch right up the track. Trains off the Tobique Sub would have to do a little runaround to be able to take their wood chip loads and lumber north to Aroostook. And what would someone find at the end of the Tobique Sub? Well, the old Plaster Rock Station. The sawmill up the hill in the background is still there in operation, now as LaBelle Lumber. These photos of the station are some of my forgotten gems. I had completely forgotten that I had even taken them. Further south, we came to the village of Bath, where southbound trains would enter the village on a through truss bridge over a small waterway alongside the St. John River. A short distance away on Hospital Street was CP's Bath Railway Station. The station appears to have already passed on to a new future at this time and is still standing today. Bath was having a Labor Day fair, as I soon found out. As I was coming into Bristol, a little further south, where 3 former CP passenger cars are located, I was suddenly hearing a thump, 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 and pulled over beside them, to the delight of finding a rear flat tire. But, in true maritime friendliness, I had a lot of folks stop by to see if I needed a hand. One gentleman who stopped and chatted with me for a while suddenly had to leave, and for good reason. He had a van load of buns for the various food vendors at the fair, and, well, he was late. The passenger cars are still there today, as is the restored Bristol train station, part of a museum. And in 2026, the rail cars were available to stay in. I had the pleasure of spending the night visiting family and friends, and this is a view one would never tire of. It looks so unspoiled, with that far ridge standing so proud. Yes, standing so proud that someone thought it would be a good spot to stick a bunch of windmills on top. And, well, they did. Starting the third off in Florenceville, I found CP 8038 and 8036, a pair of MLW RS-23s, sitting by the station with 3 real cold FGE reefers for McCain's. Looking north, we can see a feed mill, parts of which still appear to be there today, and several old potato sheds. The aforementioned McCain's plant, which is still in operation, is about a mile further north past the curve. These RS-23s were a uniquely Canadian model, and these lightweight units were the mainstay on these lines as freight traffic dwindled and track conditions deteriorated prior to abandonment. There was no one around at the time, and I was not sure of their schedule, but we will get to see this pair again. Of course, no trip to this area would be complete without a stop at Hartland and look at and drive across, both ways, the world's longest covered bridge. Still standing in 2026, but currently not open for traffic. As I continued traveling south, CP Shogomoc Sub follows NB 105 along the east side of the St. John River, and I found this maintenance away shack near mile 62.5, I think. If I am right, it is near Lower Brighton and close to CP Deep Creek. That silver maroon Chevy you see here is my carriage for the journey. It had a cot in the back for a few nights out camping on this trip. An absolute joy to drive, just not to fill up with gas, even with cheaper gas prices back then. The next stop for the day was in Woodstock, New Brunswick, where both CP and CN had a presence. Sadly, we did not take time to check out CN's Springhill Sub facilities. As can be seen, CP's Woodstock station was quite something. It was a very bustling area once upon a time ago. The station is long gone, but I do know that one of the beams with Woodstock on it is safe and sound, supporting the roof and the living room of a local home. Nearby was also a large freight shed. It too is long gone. And Mother Nature is quickly reclaiming the turntable pit. Today, if one was to look, not a whole lot would be seen of anything. I am just going to pause for a moment and look northward as the north branch of the Southwest Miramichi River flows towards us. I wonder what this scene would have looked like back in '91. It is such a beautiful spot for some quiet contemplation. A lot of history has disappeared from Woodstock, and as we just saw on my trip down along the St. John River, so has so much more. In some respects, a whole way of life where culture has been wiped out with the loss of the railways in the valley and the disappearance of a lot of things associated with it. I won't get on a soapbox here, as what is done is done. Preserving history is an expensive and time-consuming adventure, to say the least. But thankfully, my next stop, King's Landing in Prince William, was created. A lot of riverside history was going to be lost when the Mactaquac Dam was going to be built in the 60s, so some buildings were relocated to this site that opened in 1974. Additionally, some buildings were recreated in the spirit of the period or were modified to fit a theme. It was a place I had visited in my much younger days. If one was to look up the King's Landing webpage, you would find this brochure with maps identifying all the current buildings. Truly a wonderful place to visit. This scene here is what I loved about it back then. The Brunswick Lion was in the water. It is a 42-foot half-scale replica of a typical flat-bottom river scow that would have sailed the St. John River in the 1800s, hauling freight to and from various communities. It is currently in a shed on dry land awaiting repairs. But the real gem for me was the water wheel-driven sawmill in the background, with its reciprocating saw blade swooshing on each stroke. So let's take a quick tour around the site before we head to the sawmill. The centerpiece at King's Landing, I suppose, is the King's Head Inn. While it is a recreation, it is a classic example of what an 1855-ish era wayside pub and inn would look like, and where one can get a nice meal and refreshments as well. While all the buildings have an awesome display inside of life back in the 1800s, it was the outdoor areas that I loved. The Ingraham House garden has always stayed in my mind as a wonderful memory. Even in September, it was still a very gorgeous place, full of color. My photos just do not do any justice to the beauty of the garden. But hey, I shoot trains. What can I say? But I would try to do a better job these days. The centerpiece of the garden is the sundial, and if I read it right, I was there just after 12 noon. Let's go for a wander around King's Landing and enjoy some of the various buildings and views. As mentioned a bit earlier, the Brunswick Lion was a half-scale replica that was built in New Brunswick in 1975, in time for the Queen's visit to King's Landing in 1976. Still an impressive vessel at 42 feet. Hopefully, someday we'll be able to sail again as it makes a lovely scene floating at the dock. On my way to the sawmill, I paused at the gristmill, where an old water wheel could be seen lying just off to the side, and a used grinding stone as well. A very impressive structure when looking at it from below. The trail past the gristmill to the sawmill takes one to the walkway over the dam and the head pond. It is a very classic view from here as one looks out towards the St. John River. Logs were hauled up out of the head pond into the sawmill here, and why I did not get more photos from up here and of the sawing floor is beyond me. I think maybe I could not focus. I was just too much in awe in what all I was seeing. The sawmill was built in the style of a water wheel driven sawmill in the 1800s. Sawn lumber would be slid down the chute onto a wagon to be hauled away. The overshot water wheel turns a large flywheel just inside the wall where the shaft connects to various drives for pulling logs onto the carriage, moving the carriage back and forth, and of course the reciprocating saw blade, and a large one at that. Hard to see in my shot here, but we are looking at the underside of the mechanism for the saw blade. I remember this as a cool spot with the water from the water wheel close by. It was a warm day and it was greatly appreciated. The King's Landing sawmill will leave quite the impression on anyone who visits. After a long day, it was time to head to Woodstock Provincial Park. Yes, back then it was, and a peaceful evening and a good night's sleep. The campsite was not far from the water's edge, with a view out towards what was then the Trans-Canada Highway and the very impressive bridge. It was tea time as well, and while I have no way of verifying it, I was told my teapot that was given to my dad came from being used on one of CN's cabooses. I still have it and do use it from time to time. Day 5 of the journey started with a bit of a backtrack to see if 8036 and 8038 would be heading south anytime today. And luckily, we heard they were. The extra cleared the south cautionary limits in Florenceville at 10:30 hours Atlantic time, and were making their way 19.6 miles south to Newburgh. With the bridge across the St. John River at Woodstock out of service, the extra would run around their train at Newburgh and head to Fredericton on the Gibson Sub, departing there at 11:30 hours Atlantic time. Millville was and still is a quiet village, 20.6 rail miles from Newburgh, and that was where I caught extra 8036 south and a van in tow. At one time there would have been a small siding here and a station. Just a bit further south was Southampton Junction, where there was a small section house and an old speeder shack. The Southampton sub connected here with a Y, and when I got here, 8036 and 8038 were backing down the east leg to head to the St. Ann pulp mill in Nakawik. The mill is still operating, but now as part of the AVN Group, a subsidiary of the India-based conglomerate Aditya Birla. I did not chase them to the mill as that was going to be a future trip that never happened. The rest of the day was uneventful as I made my way to Moncton, as I traveled the back roads to get there. It was a journey home for me, as it seemed like an eternity since I was last back, about 10 years. Thursday, September the 5th started slow as I needed to get my flat tire fixed so I would have a spare. This trip was to be the first of many, and as I knew Moncton very well, I kind of ignored it to look for the unknown. Silly me, as I never got back for a real long time, and tracks, trains, and buildings disappeared at a rapid pace. With a repaired spare tire, off along the Springhill Sub I went, heading to Truro, Nova Scotia, and into the unknown. CN 208, a Toronto to Halifax container train, caught up with me at mile 101 Springhill Sub, in Upper Dorchester, New Brunswick, as my notes say. At the west end of CN's 5,910-foot upper Dorchester siding. No siding here now. CN 9418 is leading 2107, a Bombardier HR 616, and 9526, with about 5,000 feet of train. Except for the lonely boxcar, all containers. Looks like 208's friendly crew is running the AC wide open. Well, the cab door is wide open. The journey of exploring continued as I found my way to Londonderry, Nova Scotia, to catch via number 12, the Atlantic. Atlantic runs between Montreal to Halifax, but through the state of Maine and through St. John, New Brunswick. Here we have via 6438 at F40 PH-2 and a 6500 series FP9A, and a steam generator unit with the Algonquin Park pulling up the rear. CN had some cars parked on the team track along the 6,150-foot long siding. This siding as well is long gone. It was off to Truro for the night and an early morning visit to CN's Truro Yard, which connects, if you will, 3 subdivisions. The Springhill to Moncton, the Bedford to Halifax, and the Hopewell to Harry Boucher and on to Sydney. Looking west towards downtown Truro from the East End Crossroad overpass, we can see a local sitting out in front of the yard office on a yard track, ready to go somewhere. A van is sitting in between yard tracks and the main line that runs the Springhill Sub, while a snowplow is stored on what is listed as the team track. Hopefully it'll be a few more months before the snowplow is needed. In the distance on a storage track is what appears to be a few maintenance-away camp cars, and things look quiet over at the small engine house. Just a bit further east, we're now at the Gaspers Crossroad Pedestrian Bridge Walkway. Still looking west, this is D Yard, as shown in car control manuals. Things are quiet out here right now, and the Hopewell Sub main line can be clearly seen running along the south side of D Yard. The 2 middle tracks here look like maybe at one time they were mainline tracks, but in 1991, they're just yard tracks. Looking east now, the countryside and the tracks are looking very wet and gloomy. The Hopewell Sub is dark territory, so no signals out the east end of the yard for us to see today. Time to explore east along the Hopewell Sub to see what I could see, heading towards the Trenton-Stelton area. It was a fun drive on the back roads with lots of fun vistas, just a crappy day, like here near West River Station. Never saw much, but headed on to Pictou, where the station was still standing and still is. The tracks appear to have been long gone by now, but the station was being worked on to some extent. It is listed as a National Heritage Site and is the site of a museum and other current community activities. It was neat to look over the harbour here in Pictou to see the floating dry dock with the vessel undergoing repairs. The Canadian Coast Guard ship Narwhal is seen here in the shipyard as well. It was a medium endurance, multitask ice-breaking vessel that was a depot vessel. Built in 1963, it was used to assist in the supplying of remote Arctic villages in coordination with other vessels before it was transitioned to more general duties. From reports on the internet, sometime after I saw it here, it headed to the Pacific coast to replace vessels that were being repaired. It was decommissioned in 1999 and rebuilt as a luxury yacht. I wish I'd been able to get more photos of it. Oh well. It was back to Truro and a run south, that's rails east, looking for trains, and in Shubenacadie, mile 42 Bedford Sub, I found via number 12 at the west end of a short 3,780-foot siding. F40 PH-2, 6430, and FP9AU 6314 were moving right along as I was pushing the Ektachrome 200 as hard as I could on this dark, gloomy day. One has to love these old-style signals. They're very classic and have great style. The signal was approach lit, so it only just came on. Not sure what observation car was pulling up the rear, but sad to know that they are no longer on the rear of the current oceans, via 14 and 15. Based on the rusty siding tracks, one would guess that this siding does not see a lot of use. It was quite the drive for the day, so back to Truro for the night, and start a new day with, well, more wet, gloomy weather. But I have a few trains, and one of them has a couple of interesting loads. Not sure what the skid of stainless steel tanks and piping would be for, but a model railroader would have a fun time trying to emulate it. Along with it is a Western Combine Model 8570. What is interesting to me is that this rotary combine harvester was made by a company that bought the rights to Massey Ferguson's combine line and only made these units from 1990 to 98 in Guelph, Ontario. Western Combine was bought out by AGCO and lives on as farming brands Gleaner, Fendt, Massey Ferguson, and more. For me, who has been in a rotary combine, appreciates how rare it is to have photographed one. Never knew at the time, just thought it was a plain old Massey Ferguson and nothing special. And what is their train doing? Well, CN 512 runs from Truro to Dartmouth, a turn that would arrive as 513. Anyway, the train with the auto racks, my note says 210, but really not sure if I got that right, is blocking 512, so it is backing out the east end of the yard. Great to have a van on the rear to protect things and get switches, and will then pass by on the south side of the auto racks and head home to Dartmouth. For me, classic power with RSC 14 1759 and M636 2306. And as I said, I have trains. Here is an eastbound with intermodals, possibly 208, approaching Truro at mile 1.35 Springhill Sub with CN 5295, 2104, AHR 616, and 2313, and MLW M636. Awesome power for rail fans. For more awesome power for rail fans to drool or foam over, well, here is CN 341 from Sydney, Nova Scotia, pulling into the east end of the Truro yard at East Prince Street, mile 2.15 Hopewell Sub. CN 5294 is leading a pair of MLW M420Ws, 3524 and 3573, with another M636 2307. 3524 and 3573 were renumbered from the 2500 series in 1986-87 when they were rebuilt to reduce weight and fuel capacity. Though 3524 looks like it just only recently came out of the paint shop. This maintenance away shack is close to the East End Crossroad overpass, and when I look at it, I wonder what stories it can tell and what all has it seen. 341 had just pulled up clear and was backing in the yard to make its set off, which included a couple of ballast hoppers. As I said, classic power for rail fans and a classic paint scheme with the stripe. 341 and its eastbound counterpart, 340, operated daily between Sydney, Nova Scotia and Moncton, New Brunswick. Today's goal was to explore the Bedford Sub to Halifax, so off we go. My first stop was in Brookville, where the former train station that was built in 1930 now looks to be used as a maintenance away office. The station was moved a few yards away in 1998 and into a park where it still stands today and is maintained by a local historical society. There were sawmill operations on both sides of the track here with a possible wood chip blow line crossing over. Also here at Brookville was and still is a 2.8 mile long spur line that runs to the Lafarge cement plant. While not a large cement plant by today's world standards, amazingly it still soldiers on. Further east, compass southwest, a long shot of a westbound via crossing over the Stewiacke River near Mackay Siding, Nova Scotia. Not sure which train it is, but it could be the same consist as I saw on via number 12 yesterday. So, maybe number 11. I continued on to Halifax, sticking my nose in where I could, but I did not see any trains until I stopped in at CN's Rockingham Yard, where a pair of RSC 14s were sitting waiting for their next assignment. 1751 is in the stripes, and 1752 is in the simple black with the wet noodle. Along with them is a transfer van, possibly 76-628. While for me the best scheme is a group of units in stripes, I have always loved the simplicity of the black with the good old white wet noodle. A little further away was the Fairview Shops, where the turntable track had a great cast of characters. From left to right, we start with a pair of RSC 14s. 1761 is facing front out, and 1782 is facing rear out. With its cab facing out is 8707, an MLW S13U that had been remanufactured in 1985. We also see the rear ends of M420W 3504, M636 2329, and 2410. 2410 is a GE-8-40CM that was likely only a year old at best and lived on until being retired in 2019 or 2020. The fuel track was full of fun as well, with 2337 and 5295 facing us. 5295, of course, was the leader on the eastbound I saw earlier in the morning on the Springhill Sub near Truro. Time to check out the yellow pages, where I'll let my fingers do the walking, and a phone book in a phone booth for a camera shop to stock up on more rolls of Kodachrome 64. Boy, there's a lot of people going, yellow pages? Phone book? Phone booth? What are those? Life was simple back then, yet I still got what I needed. It was off to the Yonge Avenue overpass after stocking up on film to see what was going on down along the waterfront. Interesting to look at these shots now and compare things to a Google image. Lots still the same, yet lots has changed. Not a lot of new container wells, if any, seen here yet. Container cranes have gotten a lot larger than they were, but the saddest change perhaps is the loss of the loop track for turning passenger train. After a bit of a wait, 3576 passes underneath with a string of loaded COFCs. It was time to head back to Truro, and I made one last stop at Rockingham, now known officially as Pace Yard. I prefer the name of Rockingham to Pace, as I hate seeing historical names being replaced for no good reason. 1751 and 1752 are still sitting there waiting. And while the morning of the 8th started damp and dull with its view over Truro Yard, the day would clear and be a nice one. Not sure what train brought in the 1970s Point St. Charles built steel mainline van into town, and I did not see any power. Looks like, though, the farthest car with poles has a few on top that have shifted. Interesting to see the two different styles of cars used for transporting these poles. The wood treatment facility is still in operation just outside of Truro in 2026. In 1991, the main highway from Moncton to Halifax over Foley Mountain was Highway 104, the Trans-Canada, and it was notorious in the winter to travel on, but makes for spectacular views in the fall. I was just a bit too early. Of course, now in 2026, this road is just Highway 4, as 104 is the new toll road alignment west of here. CN 208 is just about to cross under Highway 4, just west of the 6,940-foot Foley Lake siding. With a pair of -8-40 CMs, 2419 and 2405 leading, 2307, an M636, and 1775, and an RSC 14. And if 2307 looks familiar, it was because it was on 341 to Moncton the day before. 208 had almost made it to the top of the 0.8 to 0.9% grade that eases as it gets closer to Foley Lake, and this made for an easy drive to Baseline Overpass for another look. While the train is mostly containers, there were a tank car and a couple boxcars that could be seen. This Y&S boxcar is a classic example of these old-time boxcars. Y&S is for Youngstown and Southern Railway that operated in the southeastern part of Ohio and into Pennsylvania. With 208 making the loop west and back through Londonderry, it was an easy drive to catch the 208 crossing Foley River on the 464-foot bridge. I think 208 had a bit of a slow order to clear, and they were just starting to get back up to speed. The MLWs were always smokers, but even the new GEs liked to smoke a bit as well when picking up the pace. It was back on the road heading west down 104, well, number 4 now, to Oxford Jct, Nova Scotia, where CN 534 with MLW M420W 3501 and Bombardier HR 412W 3580 were just pulling down the Maine to the junction. The train was listed as a Moncton to Springhill Junction turn that operated via Oxford Junction, where I assumed they would turn their train. The Y at the junction here is off the Main on the north side, and from my notes I have no indication of what 534 did once they arrived. Not a big train, but it does have a minutes away camp car on the head end and has van number 79508 on the rear. I did not take any more photos of the train, but I did take this photo of a CN structure that was more or less in the middle of the Y. My next stop was Springhill Junction to see what was going on there, if anything. It was quiet, but I got a few photos of this old CN station or maintenance away building. Just a few steps away to the east is this uniquely looking Via station, which I think even now is also gone. Fort Lawrence is just west of Amherst, Nova Scotia, close to the New Brunswick border. There was a British fort here that was built in 1750, and just over the border was the French-built Fort Beauséjour. There is a nice park here at the site now in 2026 that makes for a great train watching spot, and a small bridge is nearby where I shot this via number 14, the ocean, rolling across the marshlands and crossing the Missisquash River, which marks the provincial boundary here. Via 6434 and F40PH-2 and 6323 and FP9 AU have 10 cars in tow with a Park Series dome on the rear. With a rebuild in the 2009 to 2012 timeframe, 6434 is still going strong in 2026. The farmhouse in the background has been rebuilt as seen in this view in 2022, with no more farm operations. The intermediate signal has also been changed out, modernized if you will. As we look towards Amherst, the view now in 2026 will include a few windmills just to the right. Time for a side trip to Cape Tormentine, New Brunswick, where a ferry operation carried cars and trucks to and from Prince Edward Island, but no longer rail cars. Rail operations on the ferries had ceased at the end of 1989, and the ferry operations for cars and trucks were on borrowed time in 1991 as well. The Confederation Bridge was to be built in a few years to form a physical link from the mainland to the island. As a kid in the 70s, I traveled on the different ferries that operated here, and it was a joy to be on the Abagway or the John Hamilton Gray, breaking ice in the wintertime. It was a feeling or sensation I felt as the ship rose and fell breaking the ice that I will never forget. While the old train station served as a tourist information place, even it too is now long gone. Once the bridge was opened in 1997 and the ferry operations ceased, sadly the once prominent village of Cape Tormentine faded away quite a bit. There was a small 2-stall engine house and turntable to service units that loaded and unloaded the ferries, with quite a decent sized yard. The engine house and turntable set up a knoll just a bit above the yard. There was a water tank that was just a short distance away from the engine house, and in 1991, what amazed me the most was the old steam engine water filling standpipe that was still there. Something so very simple, yet so amazing. As we look over my copy of a 1989 topographical map of the area, I can share that this area holds a lot of special memories for me. I traveled with my father at times when I was out of school when he went to work to service equipment in the various canning plants on the island, or to visit friends on the island to fish or help out or vacation with the family. Those are special times and special memories, But for me, it was this area, just a tad west, that holds the strongest of those special memories. The Cape Tremaine National Wildlife Area was in the 70s where my dad and a good family friend would hunt ducks. In 1962, under Prime Minister Diefenbaker, the building of a causeway was started out to the end of the point, so that a bridge or tunnel or something could be built to better link the island. There was even a rail line that was run out along the east side of the causeway to the end. However, the price tag was getting to be too much, and work was stopped in 1969. Ambitious plans that just took a while longer to come to fruition, and with no rail. That would be something to wonder about, though, if something was actually constructed back then and a rail line was added as well. Oh, the possibilities. This causeway made a great road, but a very rough one, for us and many locals to access the marshes, and I got to go with them many times. Well, I needed someone to carry the shells and the lunch and the thermos of tea or coffee. I was also able to spend a lot of time with my little brother, our black Labrador Retriever, Joshua. The area was also a community pasture, and there was quite a herd of cows that wandered all over the area. The area was basically 4 separate marshes, and this was roughly where we had a blind set up. There was a dike or dune that ran all along the side, but had been breached in this area, flooding the land on this side of the causeway. Made for a great duck marsh, as it was not subjected to tidal influences like the other side. On a few very windy and wet days when the tide was coming in, we would drive out to the end of the causeway and make our way along the Northumberland Straits and set up along this dike showing in the back to catch the ducks as they were flying inland to get away from the storms. Again, this was roughly where our blind was. It was a fun walk from the causeway to the blind in the dark. There might have been a faint glow from the sunrise, but never much else for light. On calm, cool mornings, work loading or unloading the ferry could be heard. Of course, any unloading at that early hour was likely for rail cars. Our blind was just a short ways from these woods, and it was in these woods that I could run around to get warmed up in and not scare away any ducks flying in the area way. I just had to make sure that the cows were not around. I wasn't a cow fan as a kid, and as I am still a kid, a big one though, I am still likely not to be a fan. Easy to see where the dike or dune was breached in this shot. As we would be driving out on the causeway in the dark, I could always count on seeing the lights at the Cape Tormentine docks. Nothing exists of the ferry terminal structures now, just the docks, and there is still a small fishing harbor that is active. And for those driving to Prince Edward Island over the Confederation Bridge, this was my view in 1991, and with the help from a friend, this is what it would look like now in 2026 from roughly the same spot. The plan was to spend the night out at the end, but the fish flies were horrendous, and I could only breathe in so many, so I decided to head to Moncton for the night, which was alright, as I was headed through there next anyways. Day 10 of my trip started off with catching CN 534, approaching Edinburgh Drive, mile 0.33 Sussex Sub, as they were starting their journey east of Springhill and Oxford Junctions. 534 has 3580 leading today with 3501 trailing, along with 10 cars and a van. I really do miss these zebra stripes. And as you can see, the Sussex Sub here was double track back then. Speaking of double tracks and more, a short while later, via number 14, the Ocean, rolled down to Maine at mile 0.9 Gort Sub at CN West End. This is roughly just a bit east from the Main Street and Milner Road intersection, and I think the Esso gas station seen here in the background is still there. Power today was via 6430 and 6314. The Gort Sub ran from the Moncton station west to Catamount, and this stretch is now part of the Springhill Sub. CTC control started here at West End for going west, and 14's crew is now governed by Rule 105 to the station, per the employee timetable. West End was the west end of the old yard that used to be out in front of the station, and all that is left here now is just a single track main. The F40PH-2 and the FP9AU mix seemed to be somewhat standard back then on both the Atlantic and the oceans. It was time for another excursion, and off I went heading towards Hillsborough and the Fundy National Park in Alma. CN's Albert Sub took a circuitous route from Salisbury, New Brunswick to Hillsborough, crossing over Hiram Creek Trestle just west of Hillsborough. The trestle stood 44 foot high over Dawson Creek Road and was 220 foot long. Built in 1875, the trestle survived until 2012 when it was torn down. The tracks here were being operated by the Salem and Hillsborough Railroad when I visited there in '91. However, after a devastating fire in 1994, they ended their operations. The shops and the offices that we see here were destroyed, and the site is now the New Brunswick Railway Museum. I'm not going to get into too many details here, as there's lots of information online regarding the Salem and Hillsborough operations and now the museum. Or hey, even you could go on your own adventure and visit the site in person. Worth the trip. So come along and we can look at what all I recorded there that day. The Salem and Hillsborough Railway had quite the distinctive paint scheme. SNH 208 was a 1948 built Elco RS1 that came to Hillsborough from Devco, or the Sydney and Louisburg Railway out in Cape Breton. It started life though hauling freight for the Minneapolis and St. Louis Railway, which later became part of Chicago and Northwestern in the United States. Sadly, it was destroyed in the fire along with other equipment that was being stored in the engine house and shop area. The fire was considered to be an arson. Sad that so much history that good folks were trying to preserve was lost. 8245 and 1009 are still at the museum along with a former CNRSC 14 1754, which arrived in 1995. Not sure about 8245's status, but work is ongoing to get 1754 operating again. It was time to head further east to Fundy National Park for the night and time to explore some of the sights and trails. Lots of coves like this along the way and nice cool trails to walk in the park as well. A very notable spot is Point Wolf, as seen here from a spot along Shiphaven Trail, with what I think is an outgoing tide. there was and is a lovely covered bridge that one crosses when getting there. And I say it that way as for my visit, this was the Point Wolf Bridge. Seems that the year or so before, the bridge was damaged during a rockfall hazard removal procedure. This Bailey-style bridge was just temporary, and a new covered bridge was built a few years later. Made for an interesting challenge for me to confirm what I had written in my notes, as my bridge did not appear in most Google searches for Point Wolf Bridge. And just below the bridge, the wooden cribbing one sees is the remnants of an old dam. I camped the night in the Shubenacadie campground, and this is the view from a nearby outlook. The small village of Alma is hidden down there past the golf course. My campsite, number 98, was very close to an access point for the Kinney Brook Trail. The small brook falls along, and it is known as the Disappearing Brook, as can be seen here. It just disappears in the gravel and then reappears further down. A very unique spot with a very unique microclimate as well. Alongside a long set of stairs is a rocky outcrop of diorite. Diorite is an intrusive igneous rock and is one of the diverse mineral/rock types that are found in the Fundy area. It was a bit of lounging for the rest of the night, and Tuesday, September the 10th, started with a visit to the 45 River Covered Bridge. The 94-foot-long covered bridge was built in 1914 and crosses 45 River, where it drops down into a deeper valley. The 45 River Falls are right below the bridge and drop in a series of steps. Of course, back then it was tougher to know if you were successful in blurring the falling water and still get a reasonable exposure. There was no take a photo, look, then readjust and repeat till you were happy with what you got with today's digital cameras. It is pretty rugged country back here along the Caledonia Highlands Plateau. It would be a delightful area to visit for fall colors. It was off again down more gravel roads for a while on my way to Sussex. I did make a stop in at the potash mine near Penobscot. Well, I had to drive right by, so better stop. Glad I did, as, while not much was going on, Potash Corp's 92018 was shoving a few hoppers through the loadout. The 1950-built MLW S4 appears to have had a few cosmetic adjustments over the years. While the unit number may look more like an 019, the bottom half of the 8 has been replaced with a patch of rust on this side of the cab. The mine stopped mining potash in 2016, but the site in 2026 is still mining salt for use on New Brunswick highways in the winter. And speaking of cosmetic work, the CN Sussex train station was getting a bit of a facelift when I stopped by. The 1913 built train station looks to be getting stonework done along with a few other repairs. Now, in 2026, the main part of the station is the 8th Hussar Regimental Museum, and the baggage or freight part is an excellent spot to get ice cream. I would continue to meander my way down along the Sussex Sub to its very west end at St. John. CP's St. John Yard, Canadian Atlantic Railway's St. John Yard, was out in West St. John along Devers Road, where I found a pair of RS-23s working near the west end of the yard at Bay Street. CP rostered a total of 34 of these units, numbered 8013 to 8046, that were built in 1959 and 60. 15 of these units had St. John listed as their maintenance base in 1991. Not all RS-23s were equipped to be a lead unit, but both 8022 and 8046 here were. It was time to be off exploring, and I found my way over to Irving St. John Shipbuilding Facility, where a Halifax-class frigate, the HMCS Montreal, was under construction. When one looks over the scene, it is hard to believe that the Montreal is 134 meters or 400 each foot long. It looks small sitting in the 1,150 foot long, 125 foot wide graving dock. Across the bay in the background is the Courtney Bay Potash Terminal, which in 2026 loads ships with Saskatchewan potash. In front of the Montreal is the hull section for the HMCS Fredericton. These hull sections are built in a shop, then rolled out and lowered by a very large crane into the graving dock for assembly. The graving dock is still there, but the land around it has been taken over by other industries and Irving's wallboard plant. In this last photo, the HMCS Toronto can be seen getting its final fit out done in behind the Montreal. This view of CN's Island Yard shop will look a bit different now, because in January 2002, the yard and shop area was leased to the New Brunswick Southern Railway. In 1991, though, there was lots of CN power around it. 5260 was with 1757 and RSC 14, while 5261 and another unit were in behind. S13U 8701 was passing by on the west side of the shop with some cars. Also near the shops were vans 76 632 and 79 789, along with CN snowplow 55 400. 55 400 was built in 1935 by National Steel Car in Hamilton, Ontario. It has been getting to be a long trip, so it was time to rest and start a new day, which was going to be a quiet one. And with a new start to that new day, I slipped over to where the Moosehead Brewery was and still is to get a few photos of the former CP Lancaster station. The station was originally called Fairville, and the name changed in the 50s when the towns around here were reorganized. It is an interesting station with the witch's hat roof over the west end of the building. The waiting room on the west end was designated in early drawings as the women's waiting room. I'll leave you to make your own judgments on that. The station was in between the tracks heading to the old Bayshore Yard and to the port on the south side, with the tracks on the north side crossing over the reversing falls and heading to CN's Island Yard. There were a lot of efforts to try to save the station, but all failed, and a couple of years after I was here, it was torn down. I meandered west to St. John Yard along Devers Road to see what might be at the shops or around the yard. I found a pair of RS-23s, CAR 8023 and CP 8045. 8023 was one of 3 RS-23s painted for the CP subsidiary, Canadian Atlantic Railways. This was basically CP's attempt to create an in-house short line to try to reduce costs. The pair were working the west end of St. John Yard near Bay Street and Carl Ave. Looking across the decks of some CP container flats at the east side of the shops where the sanding and filling tracks were, I found 4 RS-18Us sitting there. CP 1808, 1807, 1847, and 18-something-5, darn pipe, with an RS-23 close to the shop itself. As I said, I was having a quiet day and finished up watching a Salty getting a tow into the port. Well, after a rest up, I started day 13 with a run over to Island Yard to see what was there for power and found a trio of MLW S13Us 8705 and 8708, which were coupled together, and 8701, which I saw 2 days previous. Looks like that may be 5261 in behind it. It was back west to the CP, the car, St. John Yard, where I found 8022 and 8046 working in the yard. This time on the east side with the Canadian Atlantic Railway symboled fuel tank in the background. I am glad I was able to photograph these uniquely Canadian units, some of which are still hauling freight in 2026. Not much at the shops today, so off up the Macadam Sub I went in search of something interesting. Just west of Wellsford, where NB 101 crossed the Macadam Sub at mile 24, there were 2 automatic block signals and a maintenance away shack. The shack was still in use, but no one was around to chat with. I figured I would wait as something had to come sooner or later. While I was waiting, I was entertained by a pair of US A-10 Warthogs doing training runs a short ways away in CFB Gagetown. I couldn't get a shot of them flying around, but they were fun to watch and listen to, with an occasional boom in the distance. As I look west up the tracks, one can see a metal cabinet. That would be the Mile 24.4 hotbox detector cabinet. These detectors have many names these days, but back then, that's what they were called. The wait was not too long, and I was rewarded with catching extra CP 1860 East with 1845 and 1825, a trio of RS-18Us running elephant style with a total of 26 cars. It was a fun and exciting catch. After it passed, I loaded up and got ahead of them just east of Westfield at Inglewood Drive, well, 12.15 macadam sub. It was fun watching these 18s fly through the curve. Wow, as fast as they could fly at 45 miles per hour, normal freight track speed on the macadam sub at the time. The white class lights on 1860 show up well in these shots. I would follow them into St. John, but hey, what happened? I saw them really slowing down as I passed them and wondering what was taking them so long. As all the units were facing east, they took the time to run around the Y at Galt Road to flip the power for their eventual return west. Neat for me as they pulled over Bay Street and passed along Carl Avenue running long hood forward. The east end of Carl Avenue looks a bit different than it does now 35 years later. It was off to St. Stephen to see what, if anything, was going on there and spend the night. It was quiet and I snapped a few photos of the 1929 built train station. The station closed in 1969 and was a public library between 71 and 1999, when the library was moved to a new location just next door. Extensive renovations were made in 2017 to the registered historic place, and in 2026 it houses a brewhouse and a restaurant. Just to the St. Croix River side of the station was this freight house. Quite the structure that looks like it has been a while since the last time a boxcar would have been spotted here. Bedtime would come early as the road back to Ontario begins. The next day was Friday the 13th. I know. I was up and on my way early and took a side trip to St. Andrews, which turned up nothing, and off north I went where I found myself in Prince William. Mile 70.97 macadam sub for via number 12 with 6433 leading a familiar 6314. No idea whether it was on time or not, just glad I caught a passenger train on the macadam sub. From there it was to Macadam, in time to catch this 28 car extra CP 1856 East with 1802 and 1823, heading to St. John, I assume. Another trio of RS-18Us running elephant style. As the train heads east, I will admit one of my regrets from this trip is not getting more photos of the vans on both CN and CP freights and in the yards. There were two sitting just east of the station with a tank car, and I never got a good photo of either. The Macadam railway station is a marvelous place, and I have visited it quite a few times in recent years, and there are lots of photos and videos on my channel for it. It is a special place to visit, especially at Christmas time. But in 1991, the station looks quite tired. It makes me smile to know that I do have photos with a Via Macadam sign clearly on the station. There were 3 tracks still out in front of the station back then, and from the looks of it, the baggage cart tires could use some air. Lots of extra platforms on the station roof helps to make the station look tired, particularly when looking at the station's west end. The east end, though, looks in better shape. That's the hill yard in the distance, and as I spin to look at the lower yard, one of the two vans I mentioned can be seen sitting near the fuel track. Looking far down track 19, past the boxcars, is what looks like the back end of a snowplow. The blue shed is still there, as is the brown shop/yard office, just it's painted green now. In 1991, there was a second track left of the twins. 2 switches point to point, though the twin switch stands are different now. Incredible granite stonework that is built to stand the test of time. Even back in 91, Canada geese were around making a mess along the Macadam Pond. Just a few steps west of the station was the CP Telecommunications Building, though it was known by other names throughout the years. It actually looks like it's in pretty decent shape. I am not sure if my friend Gary's predecessors in the Macadam Fire Department would have been able to get the fire hose cart out if needed. The shack is long gone, but the rail and the pipe can still be seen in 2026. As I am getting close to the end of this journey, I felt it appropriate to take a moment to pause and look out over the Salmon River Valley in New Denmark, New Brunswick at CN's Little Salmon River Bridge in the dwindling evening light. I showed photos of a train crossing over the not-so-little bridge earlier on day 2. It would have been nice to get a glimpse of a train crossing now, but sadly a late-running eastbound will likely not get here in time before it is too dark. It has been a great journey for me, twice. First in 1991, and now putting this video together. Now I want to reflect on this journey and what I have learned along the way. New Brunswick in particular always felt like home, and this journey back east in 1991 helped solidify that in my mind. The plan was to come back every few years and rail fan in a certain area, and then in another area the next time. Well, that never happened, as plans changed, goals changed, and life just changed as well. As they say, the only constant in life is change. In putting this together and going through everything, I have found that no matter how good one's memory is, sometimes it gets warped a bit and you may remember things not as they really truly are. There were places I could say I had visited and places I completely forgot all about. There were trains and buildings I knew I photographed, yet was surprised by the ones that I had also got. And yet there were so many I did not get when I was there, and so many that I planned to get on future trips. My notes were horrible compared to what I do now, and that was part of my problem compiling this journey. I have learned my lesson over the years, and it is one of the things I say to a lot of people, particularly rail fans: keep good notes. But a caution, as I have found out several times creating this video, sometimes the written note is completely, well, bonkers. Yes, I had some really good head shakers that took time to sort it out. With doing all the scanning of the slides and the prints, I made new notes that are much more complete with as many details as I could add. Not that I plan on reviewing them in another 35 years, but someone might, and I want them to be as correct as I can get them. So take lots of photos, as you never know when things will be gone. Keep great notes, and do not be afraid to admit that you might be wrong. Because I have learned that notes and memories may not explain what a photo shows. Notes are written by people who make mistakes. We all do. And memories can be wrong stories told over and over again. Okay, enough of that. Where to next? Well, let's see. Next was not too far away, 5.9 miles west of Macadam, according to the timetable, to the Maine Central ear of Vanceboro train station. The rail line between Vanceboro and Mattawampkeg, Maine, was originally owned by Maine Central, with CP having trackage rights. This flipped in 1974 when CP acquired the line. The station was near Church Street, and close by was this 4-stall roundhouse. And of course, the requisite turntable. There was a small yard here as well, and one can see a CP 88-foot flat car that was set up for handling rails. All are gone now except some of the tracks that are now operated by Eastern Maine Railway, part of the New Brunswick Maine Railway that also includes the New Brunswick Southern and Maine Northern Railways. Millville, Maine was sort of a hub for the Bangor and Aroostook Railroad and is where this coaling tower still stands today. It is a majestic structure for sure, and while a lot has been removed, the old coal hoist to the top and a chute that went over to the old wooden coal bunker are still there. Nearby was this turntable and a large 3-stall roundhouse. While the turntable seems to be still in use, the roundhouse appears not to be. The turntable had a nice enclosed operator station for those nasty weather days. The wooden structure seen to the left of the turntable was the now long gone aforementioned wooden coal bunker. Bangor and Aroostook's modern engine house is just around past those trees and is where I found a nice selection of Jeep 38s, sitting alongside the shop and on the fuel and sand track. Bar number 84 and number 86 were just pulling up alongside the shops when I was there. You may notice a slight difference in the MU stands in the front of number 84 and number 91. All these units were eventually upgraded to Jeep 38-3 standards. Bar number 91, with number 98 in behind, is sitting next to a very old looking diesel fuel tank car with a second and maybe a third one in behind it. Not much history is readily available on this unique looking tank car. Looking from the east side, we see that number 97 is a third unit, along with number 91 and number 98. Looking in a wider view of the back of the shops, we can see a covered hopper that likely supplies the sand for traction for the units. And just behind me is Jeep 7U number 21. This unit was originally built in 1952 for the Atchison, Pictou, and Santa Fe, or just the Santa Fe Railway for short. In 2026, one might find units from the New Brunswick Maine Railway family sitting here. Out on the north sides of the shop, I found bar X127 with its boom car X197. This big hook was reported to be a diesel-powered, 150-ton industrial brown hoist crane that started life working for the U.S. Navy in 1941. Before continuing the journey further west, I paused to look at a few of the Bangor and Aroostook's cars. 4211 is one of their classic 40-foot box cars, and the faded green 3429 is one of their converted open-top wood chip cars. From there it was west to Brownville Junction, where a trio of CP units were idling in the yard. 1837 and 1827, both RS-18Us, were with 4201, an MLW C424. A short ways away was the fourth unit, another RS-18U. I was heading now for Jackman, Maine, and I made life easy for myself and headed west to Maine Highway 201, then north to Jackman. Beautiful country all along the way. Jackman was and still is the crew change point for Canadian and U.S. crews on this rail line. The station here is still standing in 2026, but there's a fundraising campaign in an effort to save it. Hopefully they can. Too much history has gotten lost. As I sat and looked at the station, I made a decision, and that was to make a run back to Ontario where my home base was. I had been up at 5 a.m. Atlantic time, 4 Eastern, and was on the road soon afterwards. It was a long drive to just west of Toronto, and I pulled in the driveway at 1 a.m. Eastern time Saturday morning. It was a heck of a drive and a very long day to do in one shot like that on the crazy road I took, but I got there safely. The total tally for the trip was 5,719 kilometers, basically over 14 days. Thankfully I enjoyed driving and still do, just can't afford all the gas. When the video started, I had no idea just how long it would be, and it is quite long, I know. I just wanted to get these photos and the stories that go with them recorded. I had a thought of how long it would take to edit this video, but I greatly underestimated it. Much of it was taking time to do the research and confirm what the photos were showing me. With this project done now, I can get back to my regular videos and get back to scanning slides and photos and share more stories. Just shorter ones. So, thank you for coming along on A Personal Journey Back in Time, September 1991. Cheers, everyone.